Hello and welcome to the ADHD Artist Podcast, where we explore and celebrate the lives of artists with ADHD. Listen to interviews with all different types of artists with ADHD, where we talk about life, art, superpowers, and... Wait, what was I saying? Hosted by Sarah Guys, your fellow ADHD artist. Thanks for joining. My guest today is my friend Drew Smith. I met Drew through my boyfriend Joe Ramsky because they were part of a company called Chicago Slamworks. And I was really excited to have him on the podcast because there have been times when Joe and I are hanging out with Drew and his wife Makiba, and we will just go on and on about our struggles with ADHD and swap stories, and I'm just really, really excited to have him on. Drew Smith's artistic mission is to continually create art that aims to lessen the gap between those who are marginalized and those in power. He's a director, writer, actor, and musician who lives and works in Chicago. He co-wrote and co-directed Concerning Foster, a play about the desegregation of District 65 schools in Evanston, Illinois. He also co-created the play Adhd, which was a vignette-style production that asked hard questions about racial and cultural identity. Adhd received a remount due to its unprecedented success. While working as an actor, Drew has been seen on stage at the Gift Theater, Urban Street Theater Company, and Chicago Shakespeare Theater, where he understudied the production of Othello the Remix. He was also an ensemble member of the former company, Chicago Slamworks. There, he was on a team of artists who created slam poetry forward theater around different social justice themes. And he was also lucky enough to direct their final show before closing, Carrier. Drew received his BFA in acting from SUNY Purchase before moving to Chicago, and is a proud graduate of the school at Steppenwolf. He serves as the education director for Mudlark Theater Company. You can also find some of his music on Bandcamp at sirandrewthebard.bandcamp.com. Just as a heads up, there is some adult language in this episode. All right, I am here with my friend Drew Smith. Hi, Drew.
Hi, everyone.
So, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
I'm super excited to talk to you, as we've had several conversations, like late night, just talking about ADHD in general, and I've just been really excited to pick your brain. I want to dive right in. When were you officially diagnosed with ADHD?
I was officially diagnosed with ADHD when I was in 7th grade. So I grew up in Black Earth, Wisconsin, which is out in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, in the middle of cornfields. That's where I grew up. And I transferred in high school. I transferred to Middleton High School, which is a suburb of Madison. And so I transferred into a high school that was like 2,400 people. But before then, I was in middle school in this like middle of nowhere school, like literally surrounded by cornfields. Like, I'm not exaggerating.
Oh, I was there for your wedding. I saw.
Yeah. And the school itself is on all 4 sides is surrounded by cornfields. I did start doing theater when I was in 5th grade because there was a purely volunteer parent-led theater group because there was enough interest in the area. And that's how I started. But because I was doing theater, I was gay in the eyes of all of my classmates. Black Earth is a town of small minds. And I don't care if anyone from Black Earth hears this. I stand by that. It's a town of small minds, and people don't really see much beyond their own experience or care to. And so I grew up in this place where I was ridiculed and made fun of constantly. And I had a couple like really, really good friends, one kid named Scotty and one kid named Alicia. But beyond that, I had no one really. And I was picked on all the time. And I think when that happens to a kid, you kind of have 2 options. You either retreat into yourself and you become very introverted, very scared, very shy, very anxious and skittish about the world because you've learned that you're not accepted and the only way to survive is to hide because you're trying to survive, right? In that kind of scenario, you're trying to survive. And so you either become really, really introverted and scared, or you lash out and you bite back. And I did the latter. I became very angry. I fought with my parents and my sister all the time at home, but it was never really about them. It was all about the fact that I was getting picked on at school all the time. And got into some fights at school, and eventually a teacher recommended that I go to anger management therapy. I'd never been to therapy before. I was in 7th grade. And I was like, irritated that I had to do that, So I showed up to anger management with this man named Dan Flood. My dad's a therapist, or he was a therapist before he retired. And so he knew of this man. He was like, he's really good at this. He works with kids your age. You're going to go see him. Very first day I'm there, Dan Flood says, so tell me why you're here. And I said, well, people think I have an anger problem or something. I'll never forget this. I was like, people think I have an anger problem or something. And he's like, he responds, I'll never forget this, man. He responded, all he said was, well, fuck all of them, right? And instantly he had me. Like he hooked me. He got me right then and there, because he was like, I was like, this dude's on my side. Like, he gets it, And so from there we just started talking, and about a month or two into my sessions with him, I think I did 2 sessions a week initially, because everyone was so concerned about me having this anger problem. And it was a problem, it had become a problem because it had become larger than the issue of it had kind of like taken over a whole other part of me. And Dan did a whole bunch of tests on me and said, that I have ADHD, and prescribed me Adderall is what I started taking right then and there in 7th grade. And that's kind of the story of how it all came to be. It came out of like this anger problem that I had as a kid, because of the situation I was in and the circumstances, that kind of the environment, I guess, that I was going to school in kind of forced it to come out.
Were you diagnosed with hyperactive or the inattentive?
I was immediately diagnosed with hyperactive. So ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Yeah. I was, I never was diagnosed as ADD. It was always hyperactive. I mean, I've always had a lot of energy as a kid, and I don't think that every kid with a lot of energy has ADHD, but I do think that a lot of us do, or at least some of us do, some of the kids do. And so I was immediately diagnosed with that from the get-go.
Yeah. And you said that he prescribed you Adderall. Did it work right away?
Yeah, I would say so. So my when I was a kid, my parents controlled it, and like they were the ones who were like, take it in the morning before school, and then I wouldn't take it throughout the day. I would just take one pill in the morning, and then I don't think I would ever take it in the afternoon when I got home from school, although I can't really remember. Maybe they would know if I did or not. I would take one in the morning. I think I started with 10 milligrams, and then I would go throughout the day. And I think it did work right away. I don't think I really noticed any kind of difference, at least during middle school. I think once I got to high school, I definitely started to notice it affect me in a positive way in terms of my schooling and my attention during class. I think during middle school, there was just so much. I had to finish off the 8th grade year in that hellish place. And I think there was just still so much going on, turmoil around me, and my chaos within, and like me trying to control my anger, and still have to navigate all the bigots that went to school with me. So I think I didn't really pay attention to the effects of the medicine at that point.
When you started to notice the difference in class and stuff, were you taking theater classes? Were you making art in any way at that time?
Yeah, I was very involved in the drama department. Very healthy drama department at that school I went to, Middleton High School. So I was very involved in that, became a thespian. We were part of the thespian society, so I became a thespian pretty quickly. But that was the extracurricular activity I did all in high school. I didn't do anything else. I didn't play sports. I didn't run track. I didn't, nothing. And so it was all theater. Yeah.
Well, now that we're talking about art, what I'd like to know is what your relationship is like with it now.
So I went to school and got a BFA in theater arts. My degree says BFA in theater arts, but it was a BFA in acting. Like, that's what it was. I went to school at SUNY Purchase out in New York. And after school, I decided to audition for the school at Steppenwolf. And it is a long story, but long story short, I got in. And I moved to Chicago because of that. And I did the school at Steppenwolf, and then started doing theater here. So I did a couple shows professionally. Outside of that, I moved on from that pretty quickly to teaching, because I'd been teaching constantly throughout. And I taught for programs like After School Matters and YOU and Eventually I started working for Mudlark Theater as a teaching artist, and then eventually became the education director there. And I've been the education director there now for 3 years. I create, not only am I the education director there, but I also am one of their kind of resident directors. And at Mudlark, usually the directors also write their adaptations or their scripts. And so I also have created and written or co-written, I think 4 different productions for them. And that's kind of where I am today. And I'm very happy doing it. I also really enjoy creating theater with youth. And I enjoy working with teaching artists and helping them become better at what they do. That's one whole part I skipped over a little bit. Is kind of in the in-between time of acting and educating, I became a part of this company called Chicago Slamworks, where it was a bunch of actors, writers, slam poets, and we created shows that all kind of had some sort of social justice tilt, or like we would pick a theme essentially. Like one show we created a show called Handsome Animals, which was all about gender and gender identity. And we wrote it as a committee. There was probably like 12 different writers on that show who all wrote various amounts. And then there was six or seven performers. And I wrote and performed in it. And we did I think we did 9 shows actually that were like that until before the company disbanded. If the company was still around, I would still be doing that today. I mean, it was such a artistic home for everyone involved. So that was a huge outlet for me because it really helped me cut my teeth as a writer. I've always been interested in writing. I've also, I've been a white boy my entire life, but I've been a white boy obsessed with hip hop since I was about 16 when I discovered rap in the cornfields of Wisconsin. And I've always been interested in it, and I've always wanted to try it out and see if I was any good at it. Not just rap, but poetry in general and writing in general. And working with Slamworks really, I was around, everyone in that room was a better writer than me at the beginning. I looked around and I was intimidated because people would read pieces and I'm like, holy crap. Like some people would write stuff and I'm like, I would never in a million years, even today, could write something like that, because we had slam poets up there that were nationally recognized slam poets who are making theater, helping other people make theater, helping actors in the room make theater and writing stuff that's just out of this world. And so that was a really, really cool experience to grow as a writer in that room with those people over the course of 9 different shows that we all kind of wrote together.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned all that because I had a fun conversation with Joe today. And Joe actually was talking to me a little bit about your poetry because I actually never saw any Slamworks shows. Yeah. He said something interesting because we were talking about this in the context of ADHD. And he said that what's so funny is some of his favorite pieces of yours are incredibly focused and measured. And I wrote down some of the stuff. He said, they were clearly written by someone who notices the details in things, good at painting pictures, and musicality finds its way into your writing. Can you talk a little bit about that with your writing and combining your love of music and rap with your love of writing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I don't know if I can give a really good answer about how the musicality gets in there. I think it's just because I think it's kind of a natural consequence of the amount of hip hop that I consume. I listen to a lot of different kinds of music, but 9 times out of 10, if you ask me what I'm listening to when my headphones are on, it's going to be hip hop. I think I was first drawn to it because I never heard anything like it, especially growing up where I grew up, where even in my high school, which was a much bigger high school, there was probably 10 African-American kids in my grade out of 500. So it was a very homogenous place. And I, from a pretty early age, realized that I think what it was white shame and white guilt, but I wasn't able to say that at the time. I wasn't able to acknowledge it or have the vocabulary to say that, but I wanted to kind of rebel against that homogeny, and I wanted to have other experiences with other people. And when that really came to fruition is when I went to school in SUNY Purchase, because I discovered hip hop before then, but I was just, I was the kind of white kid that I would roll my eyes at today. Cause it's come on, man. you're growing up in the cornfields listening to hip hop. Like, but the thing is, there is something universal about hip hop. There is something universal about the connection that you feel to it when the beat starts, when the lyrics, you know, when a lyric connects with you in a way. And the same thing happens when a lyric is sung. But like, there is something about the connection to hip hop for me that was pretty visceral immediately. And when I went to school is when I finally was around a lot of people who didn't look like me. Like my grade, I think my class started out at 26 people, and I think white people were probably like 40% of that 26, and the rest were lots of different races and cultures. And so that was the first time where I like really learned about race relations in general, because it's something that, like, you know, as a white kid, as any white kid, your parents probably don't talk to you about race growing up, because they don't have to. When you're white, you don't have to think about your race because you're at the top of the food chain, especially if you're a cisgendered male. Right. So why think about it if you don't have to? There's lots of reasons why to think about it if you don't have to, by the way. But like, that's kind of how we all think. Yeah. You know, my parents are wonderful people, but they never talked to me about that kind of stuff. And so I thankfully had some very patient and lovely people I went to school with who were able to kind of start steering me in a direction of equitable thought and cultural engagement that was sensitive and humble. And that's the thing, is like, I didn't really, you know, initially I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to do hip hop and I'm going to be a rapper, you know. And then as I started learning about things, and after I met Makiba, my wife is African-American. And after I met her and went through a lot of growth with her, we've been together for nearly a decade and been married for almost 2. Going on those journeys and kind of learning more about myself, I was like, oh, you know, and at that point, by the time I had met Makiba, I had made whole albums of hip hop. You know, I'd like made things, I had produced music, and I started to like question, you know, if it was really my place to do it. And if it was, you know, especially, you know, it's like, I still kind of grapple with that question today, because I still make hip hop, but I don't actively promote it, and I don't actively try to take up space with it. I do it more because I love it so goddamn much, and it's therapeutic for me. And it really helps me kind of process things. Like, I've written 2 songs so far about living in quarantine that have really helped me in a way deal with my anxiety about being cooped up all the time. And so that's kind of like, I still grapple with, like, you know, I definitely feel like if I ever were to sell my music, all the proceeds would go to Black Lives Matter or go to some organization, because it's not my culture, and it's not something that I necessarily belong to. It is something that I can consume. It's something that I can enjoy, and it's something that I can have an opinion about. But my opinion doesn't weigh as much as someone else's who is a part of that culture. And so that's a complicated thing to navigate, especially when you're younger and you don't have the words to talk about it. But today, kind of where I've landed with it is that, you know, to get back to your original question, which is like, why do you love hip hop? And I think there's something about the voice. Like, hip hop was born out of an insane and immense struggle, out of vast oppression. It came out of this marginalized group of people who said, we need to find a way to express ourselves. And there's something that is so strengthening and powerful beyond words about that. It's so much just bigger than music. It's so much bigger than the hip hop itself. Like, because hip hop is like an umbrella phrase for a lot of things, you know, including breakdancing and DJing, and like lots of graffiti is a part of hip hop, you know. And so it's something that I was drawn to because there's authenticity in it when it's done well. There's something authentic about the voice, and I use voice metaphorically as well as literally. But there's something really prolific and authentic about the voice that feels really deeply rooted in the expression of the art.
Well, there's also something about the beat that, I mean, there's a lot of studies done with ADHD people and music, and hip hop is known for having this really amazing beat. And so
most of the time,
again, as with any genre, exactly. But I'm hooked on what you said about how even though you acknowledge that it may not be your place to like produce this stuff that it's how you manage your anxiety, and it's therapeutic for you. And that leads me to my next question, which is probably my favorite question
Sure.
that I like to ask. What does it feel like to make art?
Yeah. It feels necessary for me. It's like it's like the air I breathe, the water I drink. It sustains me, and necessary is like the best way I can describe it. I know that's not a feeling or an emotion.
Sure.
I guess if we were talking feeling or emotion, it would be like joy and release, catharsis, I guess. One example an anecdote I can tell you is like, there was a period of time when Makiba, I was like irritable, and I was going through a period of time where I was just very irritable, and I would kind of snap at her, or, have a tone with her when I wouldn't even realize I was doing it, and she pointed out, she was like, I think that since we've moved, you haven't had your recording studio set up, and you haven't had an artistic space to like go and make stuff. And I think that is making you more irritable and more snappish with me. And I was like, yeah, she's right.
You didn't have a creative outlet.
Yeah. And I did, I had Mudlark. I was working at Mudlark, but like that is a job. And even though it can be a creative outlet depending on what I'm doing there. It's still a job, and it's still, even when I'm directing a show, I still have like, 15 kids in the room, and I still have to make something happen with those 15 kids and make the kids feel like they've had a worthwhile time and that they want to come back, whereas when I go into the studio and I plug in the microphone and I shut off the noise of the world, there's something that, like, those are my wings, like that's when I'm allowed to fly.
Wow.
Yeah.
I really like that metaphor. So, I mean, to me, what I hear is that's what it feels like. It feels like you have wings when you make art. And I just think that's really incredible. So, okay, let's talk about meds.
Sure.
Because I'm very, very curious about how meds do or do not affect the art itself and the artist making it. So do you find that you are more creative when you've taken your medication than when you have not?
It depends on the kind of art I'm making.
Okay.
So if I'm writing, let's say, I think that my medication helps me 99% of the time in a very positive way.
Yeah.
It helps me stay focused, because writing can be it's like tunnel vision, like you're on a notebook or you're at a computer, and that's all there is the words on the page or the words on the screen. And it can become kind of like exhausting. Yeah. And so like taking my medication will help me have the fuel to keep going and to not let my mind wander off of the task. But then where it changes, I think, is when I perform. When I take medication before I perform, I feel like it mostly hinders me.
Interesting.
Which I struggled to figure out. So I can tell you this, that when I was in college, I took Adderall all through the end of my middle school life, all of high school. And then in college, when I got to college, before I got there, I was like, this is a serious acting school. I want to take it seriously. And so I talked to my doctor, and I was like, I want to stop taking Adderall for a while. And so I stopped taking Adderall for about a year and a half. So I went through my whole freshman year of not taking it. And then around halfway through my sophomore year, which is kind of when a lot of the workload increased. And also when we did do more general ed classes and we had like essays to write and stuff like that about stuff that I didn't care as much about, I went back on it. And then when I went back on it, I noticed that like there were days, like I remember the story you told me, Sarah, the other night about you taking some medication right before you knew you were going to have to do a scene in class. Yeah. And I had similar situations like that happen for me, where I knew I was going to perform, or it was like the night of a show, and I would get nervous or anxious, and I'd be like, this will help me take the edge off, which is like ultimately not what the medication is for. It can be if you find that you get distracted while you're performing, which, can happen, it happened a lot, especially when I was a younger actor, not having all the training that I have now. You can totally check out in the middle of a scene. There's so many times that teachers would be like, where'd you go? Where are you? Come back to the room,
It's like my worst nightmare is being called out. I'm like, no, I was here the whole time.
Yeah. And like every time they're right.
Yeah.
I would definitely take it while performing. And I didn't really notice much of a change in college. Like I did it a lot. I would take it before I did a show, and I never thought much of it until I got out of college and started working professionally. And that's when I realized, oh, there's like things that happen to me sometimes when I take it, especially if if I accidentally took too much or haven't eaten enough today, the medication will make my hands really, really shaky. And it will also, my vision gets kind of weird. It'll kind of blur, not blurry, but almost like my eyes are vibrating.
Interesting.
And so that's kind of what it feels like, is like things are always just kind of shifting a little bit in my vision sometimes, and I noticed that too when we started doing the pause shows, and I had to host kind of a open mic of sorts, a competitive open mic called Pause, which is all about any kind of like language-based art form. You can come and compete and earn, win some money if you win. But I had to be a host for a couple of those shows, and I'm not a very good host. I don't enjoy hosting. And so I would get a lot of anxiety about that. And so I would take Adderall before I hosted it. I just noticed my hands were like shaking the entire time. And, and I would have to like put my hands in my pockets to like, cause it was visible. It was a small space. So like anyone in the audience could see it, and it wasn't that I was nervous necessarily. It was that the medication was like manifesting itself there when it normally doesn't. Normally I don't shake at all. Normally it's like, it's just kind of affects me the way it should. And so like I have experienced it with performing, and it does at times, I feel like, hinder me. And so I think when I do start performing again at some point in my life, I will have to really reckon with whether or not I'm going to, because the other thing is like, if you take Adderall, for me at least, when I take Adderall at the beginning of the day or sometime earlier in the day, when it starts to wear off, I start to feel really weird. And I start to feel strange interacting with people, because it's like you've been on this drug, it's a psychoactive drug, it's a controlled substance, and it does things to your brain and your body.
Right.
And when you need it, it's really, really positive and good. But then when you start coming off of it, you can feel weird sometimes. And so, I also don't want to be coming off of it as I have to perform. So it's like, what's better, performing on it or off of it and having to deal with the strain, so like, I'll just have to think about that when I start to perform again.
Yeah. Well, you bring up such a great point that fascinates me, and I don't feel like it's talked about enough. And trust me, I've been to many therapists. I've been to psychiatrists. Like I have been going in. It's not like I'm not part of the conversation, having these. But I think a lot of times with these medications, they are given to people who they take it at the same time every day.
Yeah.
They've got like structure in their lives. So what happens when you are an artist or someone who does freelance and that doesn't work for you?
Yeah.
So like, you take it in the morning, but by the time you have to go to your call time for a show, it's wearing off, and maybe you're getting cranky, you're coming down a bit.
Yep. And then if you take it for your nighttime show, you're going to be up really late.
That's exactly right.
It's going to be really hard to go to bed. Yeah.
Nowadays, do you take it once a day, like in the mornings?
So yeah, good question. So since I started retaking it again in college, when I went back to my doctor and I was like, I would like to start taking it again, we went from 10 milligrams to 15 milligram pills at that point. I still have 15 milligram pills today.
Okay.
But what I do, I generally break them in half, and I'll take 7.5 milligrams per time I want the effect. And I'll generally that will last for me from anywhere, depending on how much I've eaten, how much sleep I've gotten, that'll last from like 3 to 6 hours per 7.5 milligrams. So I have a pretty low tolerance, all things considered. But I've done that on purpose, because I don't want to get to the point where I'm like, oh, I need 20 milligram pills now, or I need, like, I just don't want to become, I don't want
dependent.
That to be my relationship. Yeah, I don't want that to be my relationship to it, But I at that point when I was in college, my prescription said take as needed. And it said, take up to 2 times a day, take as needed. And so that's still what it is today, even though I have a different doctor. It's a take as needed prescription up to 2 times. But the thing is, since I break them in half, I can take it up to 4 times if I have a really full day. So ultimately I'm taking 30 milligrams in a day, but I'm taking it 7.5 milligrams at a time.
Got it.
if I have a day that starts at 8 in the morning, it doesn't end until 10 at night, I'm probably going to be dosing 4 times, depending on what I'm doing,
Do you find it stressful to decide when to take your medication and when not to?
Yeah, I do. I don't think it completely ruins my day necessarily.
Yeah.
I think some people might be more stressed out by it than I am, but I definitely feel like it does stress me out a little bit.
Well, and you've been on it for several years. I know some people I've been talking to were just diagnosed as adults. I was diagnosed when I was 8 years old, and you were diagnosed in 7th grade. So we've had longer to get used to that, but I'm just curious about your stress level with that.
No, I definitely do. And I think it comes from the fact that you brought this up, that as a freelancer, as an artist, we may not have strict routines. Yeah. And each day looks different for us. And so the times that you take, it's going to be different depending on what you're doing. And that can be very stressful to decide whether or not to take it. There are times when I'm like, I feel like I have to take it later in the evening. Like usually my rule of thumb is like, if I take it after 4 PM, I'm going to have a hard time going to sleep at a reasonable time. Right. But there are times when I'm like, I have to take it later in the evening because I have to work late. And then I'll purposefully have like a later night. I mean, I'm a night owl in general. Like I feel like I'm more creative and I get more stuff done when it's dark out.
Same.
Because I feel like the rest of the world is asleep and I'm like, great, now I can like do what I need to do.
Yeah. Problem is then I sleep till like noon and I'm like, well, there goes the morning.
I do too. And so, it can be very stressful to decide when you're going to do it. Because sometimes I'll speak for myself. Sometimes I don't always make the best judgment call. Because there are times when I'll take it, too late when I shouldn't have. I'll take it too late and it's like, I have to get up at 9 tomorrow morning. Well, it's too late. It's already down the esophagus, And so it's kind of, that doesn't happen too often, but it does happen sometimes because it's a lot to keep track of when you're also keeping track of your entire life. And so it can happen for sure. So it is a stressor. It doesn't break my back or anything, but it definitely isn't just like, I take it at the same time every day and I don't have to worry about it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so funny because structure can be really good for us with ADHD, but we hate it. We hate it so much and that's, one of the reasons I think that we're drawn to being artists is that we could be doing the same art form, but our day-to-day changes. And so it keeps it interesting. And we get to work on this project and then we get to work on this next one. And
that's so real.
It's so ironic. You're like, oh, so frustrating.
Yeah, it's so real. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, what advice do you have for aspiring artists with ADHD?
I think if you're a writer or if you're a musician or if you're creating something that comes from you, from your heart, your soul, your brain, can you live without expressing yourself? And if you can't, then you need to express yourself. I think if you're struggling, you're a young artist, first of all, like being in the arts, you're going to struggle your whole life. Being an artist is hard, but if you have to do it, if you would, like I said, when Sarah asked me earlier, like, what does making art feel like to you? And I said, it feels like I have wings when I do it. And it feels like a necessity for me. If that's your answer, then fuck yeah, you got to keep doing it. Even if it is hard. If it was easy, everyone would do it and it would no longer have value. So it's okay for it to be a struggle and for it to be hard. And if you have ADHD, and you're also an artist, you're trying to navigate the medication, and the times you take it and the dosage and the shame that comes along with it. And like I told Sarah a couple of days ago when we were having like a cocktail hour together, virtually with our partners. Yeah, we were social distancing. Don't worry. I shared a story about like the shame I have with taking it. It's like whenever I go to take my medication, I hide it. I don't want people to know that I'm taking it. Because I found early on, it's strange, but I found people are fucking nosy. And if I take out a pill bottle and put my fingers in to take a pill out, people are like, oh, what's that? It's like, mind your fucking business. That's what it is. Like, and I don't want to be that asshole who says that. So I'm like, so instead I just go to the bathroom or I, do it when no one's looking. And, there's a lot of shame that comes with that. And because like, if someone asks you and you say, oh, it's Adderall, I have ADHD, their reaction could be a million different things, and I just chose to not have to roll the dice on that every time, and instead kind of hide it from people so that they don't ask me those questions.
Yeah.
I do feel like, if you're trying to navigate all this stuff, my pieces of advice to you are: be gentle to yourself and to check in every now and then with your relationship to the drug. It's something that I've thought a lot about. Is like something I asked my wife the other day. I was like, will I be taking Adderall my entire life? Like, when is the deadline for me to stop? People used to think that you grew out of ADHD as you got older. And with me, that's definitely not the case.
Same.
I mean, I could bring Makiba in this room and she would be like, oh my God, when he doesn't take his medication, it's like a whole different.
That'll be another podcast episode.
I become like a 5-year-old child who needs to run around and sword fight, and so, which is, sometimes that's how I want to be. I want to exist in that space. And it's great. But like, you don't necessarily grow out of it as an adult. And so, your relationship to the drug needs to be one that you are at peace with, because, there are a lot of people who can abuse it, and do abuse it and imbibe it in ways that, is not healthy. And I feel like I've done a fairly good job my whole life of avoiding that, but I've always asked myself those questions of like, okay, am I dependent on this? Could I survive without it? What would I be like without it? And the answers are scary sometimes to think about, but I think it's important to check in every now and then with yourself and your relationship to the drug. You don't want to wake up one morning and be like, holy shit, here I am and I'm glued to this pill. Yeah. How do I unstick myself from this medication?
Do you feel like people with ADHD can have superpowers as artists?
Abso-fucking-lutely. Yeah, I do. Well, I think that for me personally, that my sense of play and my sense of wild abandon has never left. And I don't think that is entirely due to the fact that I have ADHD, but I do think that plays a role in it. I think that that's something that as a kid, I was always like, I never want to mature. I never want to be grown up, and here I am 32 years old. I'm definitely a grown up. And, I spend most of my time around 10 to 14-year-olds working at Mudlark. So I definitely am reminded that I'm a grown up constantly. But the fact that I have never lost that sense of play, like I said earlier, being a 5-year-old running around sword fighting with sticks in my backyard, like that's what I did as a kid. Like I had 5 TV channels growing up. I lived in the middle of nowhere. I had to run around with sticks and fight imaginary foes and save princesses and rescue dragons. And and I was just like, all this stuff was in my head and I lived in my head and my imagination, and that hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
It manifests itself differently now as an adult because I can't just go down the street in Chicago sword fighting imaginary foes because the cops would get called and then I would have to be arrested, So, that's, it manifests differently now, but like that is definitely a superpower, I feel.
So my last question is just, I know that things are very uncertain in the future, but do you have any projects that we can support you on or anything cool you have coming up?
Oh, I don't know. Well, I guess if there's anybody out there who has children who are between the age of 6 and 14, Mudlark Theater is running starting June 8th. From June 8th to July 3rd, we're running virtual summer camp programs over Zoom, and we just got finished running like 7 weeks of online classes. And so we've had some time to hone it and practice and really figure out how we do this online thing. And so starting in summer, when we're inevitably still going to be at home. So if you're a parent and you've got a kid between the age of 6 and 14 and you're like, I can't be around my children that much longer or I'm going to kill them, which, I empathize with, send them to us. Mudlark Theater is spelled with an ER, mudlarktheater.org. And right then and there at our landing page, you'll see our summer camp link and you can come sign up. And we will be running programs too in July and August, but we haven't decided yet if they're going to be 100% virtual or some sort of hybrid between like some in-person socially distanced classes with virtual, but it's looking more and more like it's going to be 100% virtual, but we're waiting to make that decision until we hear more from our state leaders.
Yeah. Well, even the virtual classes I've seen of you guys are pretty darn cool. Like I keep seeing, my friend Krista is a teaching artist there, and they keep posting all these pictures of all the cool makeup, like the makeup designs that they're doing. And I just keep being like, I kind of want to take this class.
Yeah. Fantasy makeup is Krista's amazing at that. Yeah. It's great.
Oh, great. Drew, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for being here virtually with me. I got so much out of it.
Thanks for having me on the show.
And that's it for today for the ADHD Artist Podcast. This podcast was produced by me, Sarah Guise. Original music composed by Christopher Aaron Narr. You can find more of his work at www.christopheraaronnar.com. Narr is spelled Knarr. Podcast artwork by Joseph Ramsky. For any inquiries, you can contact him directly at jramski3@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at the ADHD Artist Pod.